Today, we're really digging into a pivotal moment in American history, Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal.
Right.
Just try and picture the country deep in the Great Depression. You've got, well, despair everywhere, the economy's collapsing, and there's this real sense of fear. That's where we're starting.
It really felt like the whole system, American society, capitalism itself, was just unraveling.
Right.
So our mission today really is to explore how one president in this unprecedented crisis completely reshaped what the federal government does. Not just giving immediate help, but trying to, cure the nation's economic problems for the long haul.
And we've got some great sources lined up. They paint such a vivid picture. His confidence, those famous fireside chats, but also the nitty-gritty of these huge job programs and the political fights.
Yeah, the battles were intense.
So get ready for, I think, some surprising facts and a much deeper understanding of what it actually took to pull a nation back from, well, the edge.
Oh, okay, so let's unpack this. Roosevelt's rise. The 1932 election, it's such a stark contrast, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
You have Herbert Hoover, apparently unwell, seen as, well, ineffective. And then Franklin Roosevelt, who, despite his own huge physical challenges with polio, just radiates confidence.
Optimism, yeah.
What made him so compelling for a country that was just desperate for change?
Well, what's really fascinating is Roosevelt came from serious wealth, political establishment. But he managed to present himself as completely different. He didn't actually offer tons of specific policies in the campaign, but he promised a new deal for the American people. That phrase itself offered hope.
Just the idea.
Just the idea.
Yeah.
And his own struggle with polio, being paralyzed from the waist down, it seems to have genuinely fostered this empathy for suffering.
Which really connected with voters. And it's interesting, he deliberately avoided being photographed in his wheelchair. He wanted to project strength, always.
He wins, and it's a landslide. But then the country hits this 4 months between election and inauguration. Our sources call it the absolute worst winter of the Depression. And incredibly, his presidency almost didn't even happen. There was that assassination attempt.
Right. In Miami. It's a really telling moment. His reaction, so calm, comforting the mayor of Chicago, who was shot right next to him.
Unbelievable.
It just projected this steadiness that the country desperately needed. It reassured people.
And that whole chaotic period, it highlighted a system flaw, didn't it?
It really did. It directly led to the 20th Amendment, shortening that gap between election and taking office.
Right.
But even then, right before taking the oath, Roosevelt himself admitted he wasn't entirely sure what the exact plan was.
So what did he believe in? He was clear about positive government action, right? Federal relief, public works.
Yeah, absolutely. Social Security in some form, unemployment insurance, definitely regulating banks more strongly.
And he gathered that group, the Brains Trust, Tugwell, Molly, Burl.
And they kind of reflected this pragmatic, let's try things approach. Molly focused on tax policy. Tugwell wanted a bigger government role in, wages and prices.
Almost planned economy vibes?
Sort of, yeah. And Burl was more of a mediator, suggesting federal intervention to smooth out economic cycles. They knew they had to, save the patient immediately and then figure out how to cure the illness long term.
And his inauguration day, March 4th, 1933. Sounds like a movie scene. Gray, rainy. Then the sun breaks through as he takes the oath and delivers that line. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
What a moment for people.
Just immense hope injected into the nation right there. And then, boom, the legendary first 100 days. Just an explosion of laws.
Unprecedented speed and scope.
He goes right after the banks, like a surgeon. Declares a bank holiday, shuts them all down. Passes the Emergency Banking Act. Takes the country off the gold standard, essentially.
And the psychological effect there was huge. Think about it. Between March 11th and 14th, federal auditors are just swarming the banks.
Right.
By the 15th, 70% are declared solvent and reopen. But the real game changer, maybe, was that first fireside chat.
Ah, yes. Using the radio.
He just spoke in simple terms, this really reassuring tone, like your grandpa explaining things, talking about complex finance, but making people feel their money was safe. And ironically, the man talking about the hearth and home, he actually had this significant fear of fire himself because of his paralysis.
Wow, I didn't know that. But he projects that comfort.
Yeah.
And taking the country off gold, that gave the government more flexibility, right?
Huge flexibility. No longer tied to gold reserves. They could manage the money supply much more actively to try and stimulate recovery. Absolutely essential.
And here's the amazing part. It actually worked. People responded.
Immediately, within weeks, nearly $1 billion in cash and gold that people had stashed away.
Under mattresses, yeah.
Exactly. It all gets redeposited. That shift in public confidence was just enormous.
And then, beyond that, you get Glass-Steagall, separating commercial and investment banking.
Trying to prevent future crises.
And the FDIC, ensuring deposits up to $2,500, a system we still have today, basically.
Absolutely. Crucial steps for stability and trust. But the first New Deal wasn't just banks, was it? It had broader goals.
Right. Job creation, economic regulation, and this idea of regional planning.
Those are the other pillars.
So job creation, let's look at that. Programs like the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps.
Putting young guys 18 to 25 to work outdoors, planting trees, fighting fires, building state parks, really visible stuff.
And the CWA, the Civil Works Administration.
Employing millions, building roads, schools, airports. Direct relief, yes, but also long-term investment in infrastructure.
Things the country needed anyway.
But they also had to rescue farms and factories which were in dire straits. The AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, that one was controversial.
Paying farmers not to farm, essentially.
Right. To reduce production, hoping to boost prices, which led to, the truly shocking sight of plowing under 10 million acres of cotton.
While people were hungry.
And slaughtering 6 million piglets. It was economically desperate trying to manage this crisis of bizarrely abundance and lack of demand.
It sounds awful, and critics must have jumped on that.
Oh, absolutely. Corrupt capitalism, they called it. And it definitely didn't help everyone equally. Small farms, sharecroppers, tenant farmers often lost out, got laid off.
Which even led to unions forming, like the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, the STFU.
Right, using music like John Hancock's did to organize and protest those inequities.
And for industry, you have the NIRA, the National Industry Recovery Act, and the NRA.
Similar idea. Suspend antitrust laws, let businesses cooperate on codes for prices, minimum wages.
The Blue Eagle logo everywhere.
And crucially, it established workers' rights to organize. But it was incredibly complex. Codes for everything from steelmaking to burlesque shows.
Seriously?
Apparently so. It led to huge implementation problems and also a lot of labor unrest, strikes, some violent clashes.
And finally, that regional planning piece. The TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority.
Right. This wasn't just jobs. It was a massive visionary project. Flood control, reforestation, hydroelectric dams.
Bringing electricity and development to a really poor region.
A whole river valley transformed. But even there, criticism. 15,000 families were displaced by the dam.
And women largely left out of the direct construction jobs.
Yeah. So it raises this important point. The first New Deal, it definitely stopped the free fall, restored hope.
Huge psychological boost.
Immense. But it wasn't some perfectly designed machine. It was experimental, sometimes messy, learning as it went, driven by sheer urgency.
Okay, so the economy's maybe turning a corner, but still fragile. Hope is back, but problems remain. How does Roosevelt shift gears into what we call the second New Deal?
Well, he wins re-election in 36 in another massive landslide. But the criticism hasn't stopped. If anything, it's coming from more directions.
Right. He's getting hit from both sides. Conservatives are screaming socialism.
Yep. Groups like the American Liberty League saw it all as a threat to free enterprise, to the American way.
But then you have liberals and populists saying he hasn't gone nearly far enough.
You've got figures like Dr. Francis Townsend proposing this huge pension plan for the elderly, Father Charles Coughlin, the radio priest, arguing for nationalizing banks and industries.
And Huey Long.
And Huey Kingfish Long, yeah. His Share Our Wealth plan basically liquidate large fortunes, give every family $5,000.
The math was shaky, wasn't it?
Very shaky, but incredibly popular. Long had a massive following. He was a genuine political threat to Roosevelt's dominance until he was assassinated in 35.
And on top of all that political pressure, the Supreme Court starts throwing wrenches in the works.
A big wrench. They strike down the AAA, they strike down the NIRA. Key parts of the first New Deal declared unconstitutional.
So how does FDR respond to all this? Legal setbacks? Political attacks?
He doubles down, basically. He pushes through a new wave of what he called must-pass legislation. This becomes the second New Deal.
And this is where we see maybe the more lasting changes to the social safety net.
I think so. The Works Progress Administration, the WPA, is a key part of this. It becomes this enormous jobs program.
Bigger than the CWA.
Much bigger, longer lasting, employed over 8 million people eventually. It's like 20% of the workforce.
Yeah.
Building hospitals, schools, roads, infrastructure everywhere.
And wasn't there that fascinating arts component to the WPA, Federal Project Number 1?
Yes. That's often overlooked, but so important. It put 40,000 artists, writers, musicians, actors back to work.
Doing what?
Creating public art, murals you can still see today, writing state guidebooks, putting on free concerts, and incredibly valuable, collecting oral histories from formerly enslaved people.
Wow. Preserving that history.
An absolutely invaluable archive. And then, of course, the cornerstone, the Social Security Act of 1935.
The big one.
Establishing programs for the elderly, the unemployed, disabled, dependent children, creating that pension fund through payroll taxes. Revolutionary for the U.S.
But it had gaps initially, right?
Crucial gaps, yes. It excluded domestic workers and agricultural work, that many women and African Americans who were concentrated in those jobs were left out of the immediate benefits. A major limitation.
What about workers and unions in this phase?
Big gains for labor. The Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Act, huge. It protected the right to unionize, to bargain collectively.
And created the NLRB to enforce it.
Exactly. The National Labor Relations Board. This really cemented labor support for the Democrats for generations.
So how did he deal with the Supreme Court problem? That opposition?
The court packing fight. That was controversial. He proposed adding up to 6 new justices to the Supreme Court, basically to get a majority favorable to the New Deal.
Did it work?
The plan itself failed. Huge opposition, even from Democrats. But interestingly, soon after that fight, the courts started upholding key Second New Deal laws.
Like Wagner and Social Security.
Whether it was intimidation or just a shift in judicial thinking, the famous switch in time that saved 9, the court never again struck down major New Deal legislation.
And the last major piece was the Fair Labor Standards Act.
Right. Establishing the first federal minimum wage, the maximum 40-hour work week, and finally prohibiting child labor nationally. Truly foundational labor laws.
So let's pull back and look at the big picture, the lasting legacy. What did it all mean long term?
Well, fundamentally, the New Deal just massively expanded the federal government's role. It took on responsibility for the economy, for citizen welfare, in ways that were unthinkable before 1933.
Laid the groundwork for so much of what we have today, didn't it?
Absolutely. Many historians, economists, they see it as a huge success in that sense, establishing minimum standards, wages, working conditions, welfare, helping millions keep their homes, their farms, their savings.
And influencing that whole post-war period of economic stability.
Definitely a factor. But, like any massive transformation, it wasn't perfect. There were significant shortcomings and ongoing debates.
Let's touch on those. Unemployment, for instance. Still high in 1940.
Still stubbornly high, around 15% on the eve of World War II. The New Deal eased the Depression, but didn't fully end it. That took war mobilization.
And environmentally.
Yeah.
The CCC did good work planting trees.
True, but then you have these massive dam projects, like Grand Coulee on the Columbia River. Huge engineering feats, but with significant environmental costs, displacing communities, impacting fish runs.
A mixed bag there.
Definitely. And then there's a crucial question of who benefited most and who was left behind.
Particularly regarding race.
Yes. The sources are pretty clear about overt discrimination in many federal job programs. African Americans often last hired, first fired in the CCC, CWA, WPA.
The NRA was even called the Negro Runaround.
Or Negroes ruined again by some in the Black community, highlighting how those codes often didn't translate into equal benefits. And as we said, Social Security, excluding domestics and farm workers, hit African Americans hard, especially women.
But there were positive developments, too, the Black Cabinet.
Yes, that informal group of African-American advisors like Dr. Robert Weaver, who later became the first Black Cabinet Secretary under LBJ, and the incredible Mary McLeod Bethune.
She directed the NYA's Division of Negro Affairs.
Right, and she was a powerful voice, really using her position to push for Black literacy and educational opportunities within the New Deal framework.
What about Roosevelt himself on race? It seems complicated.
Very complicated. His personal record is mixed. He spoke out against lynching, which was important symbolically.
But didn't push legislation.
No. He felt he needed Southern Democrats in Congress for his broader economic agenda and feared alienating them over an anti-lynching bill. A political calculation.
But he did make some key appointments.
He did. Appointed the first Black federal judge, William Hastie. Promoted a Black officer to brigadier general. Supported abolishing the poll tax. Small steps. but significant for the time.
And this is where Eleanor Roosevelt becomes so important, isn't she?
Absolutely crucial. She really stepped into that space. She actively lobbied for the anti-lynching bill her husband wouldn't push.
And that famous incident with Mary Anderson.
Iconic. When the Daughters of the American Revolution refused to let the Black opera singer perform in their hall, Eleanor resigned her membership in protest.
And then arranged for her to sing at the Lincoln Memorial.
A hugely powerful public statement. Then invited her to sing at the White House. Eleanor became the administration's conscience, its face on civil rights, doing what FDR politically couldn't or wouldn't.
What about other groups? Native Americans?
Actually, the New Deal marked a significant positive shift for Native Americans. The Indian Reorganization Act of 1934 reversed decades of assimilation policy.
How so?
It encouraged tribal self-government, cultural preservation, and stopped the allotment policy that had broken up tribal lands. John Collier, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, was key, helping return nearly 2 million acres to tribal control.
And women. We mentioned Frances Perkins, the first female cabinet member.
Huge figure, Secretary of Labor throughout his presidency. And Molly Dewson was a brilliant political organizer, mobilizing women for the Democratic Party.
But policies sometimes reinforced traditional roles. And wage gaps persisted.
Yes, definitely. Wage discrimination was common, and some relief policies subtly favored men as primary breadwinners. But the WPA did hire women, especially widows and single women. And again, Eleanor Roosevelt was a tireless advocate.
For women, African Americans, the rural poor.
She championed all those causes, using her platform relentlessly.
We have covered a huge amount of ground today, from those really desperate days of the Depression to the sprawling, ambitious, sometimes contradictory programs of the first and second New Deals, and this lasting legacy of a fundamentally changed federal government.
It was just such a period of intense experimentation, wasn't it? Political fights and these really fundamental shifts in how Americans thought about the government's job, its responsibility to its people. It really set up a framework, a set of expectations that still shapes our country today, for better or worse.
So thinking about all this, what does it mean for you, listening now? Maybe consider this. The New Deal sparked these really intense debates, didn't it? Individualism versus a collective welfare state.
Security versus freedom, almost.
Exactly. And those debates, they're still echoing very loudly in our politics today. So as you think about these choices made back then, the consequences, how does that history shape your understanding of the government's role now?
What part of the New Deal's impact, good or bad, really resonates with your own experience or views today? Something to think about.